and we obviously went to great pains to make sure that Americans with pre-existing conditions could not be denied coverage. Those regulations and those protections are all intact in the House and in the Senate bill. But to your point, there's a broad range of other regulations that the House allowed to be waived. But then, frankly, Senator Cruz has developed some very creative proposals, including freedom policies, which would say to a state, look, if you offer an insurance plan that meets what remains of the federal regulations, then you can also offer to Americans the ability to buy a health insurance product that doesn't meet those same criteria. Marketplace, and to say, look, if I want all the benefits that are listed here, some of which are certified by the state or even the federal government, I'll pay for that. If I don't want all of those benefits, I ought to be able to buy that as well. That's ultimately a free market principle.
Precisely.
Where President Trump is driving health care reform, but it all begins with repealing and replacing Obamacare.
Well, the reason why all this is crucial is because, as many people will acknowledge, some won't, Obamacare was designed to implode in part so as to further the public's acclamation for single payer. If Obamacare, which was sold as the greatest panacea ever, if not even that can work, the thinking goes, I guess the government's going to have to take over. That's where, if Obamacare stays intact, that's where we're headed. We're headed to single payer. We're headed to everybody on Medicare. And then, there's no coming back from that. You would never unravel that if that happened, and that's
right.
That's disastrous. So,
well, Rush, I make a point. Back when I was in Congress and as a governor and now as vice president, I never speculate on people's motives. But you remember what a member of Congress said back in the day when he was asked, "Why aren't you supporting single payer?" Barney Frank, do you remember that famous quote? It was caught on YouTube back in the day. Former Congressman Barney Frank was walking into an event. They said, how come you're not supporting single payer? He said, Obamacare is the quickest way to get to single payer.
Right. Obama said the same thing to the SEIU people back in 2007. We've got the tape. We've played it for a bit. That's exactly what the objective was.
Well, I mean, and I'd leave it to you. You didn't miss that back when it happened, and you're not forgetting it today. And people ought to be reminded that as you have Bernie Sanders out in Kentucky, where I'm headed to Kentucky in a couple days myself. He was out there championing single payer this week. Well, the heartbreaking story of the 11-month-old Charlie Gard in England is a story of single payer. I know you've covered that on this program, and it's back in court today. And frankly, we breathe a prayer in the hope that the single payer system in England will see its way clear to allow the family, the mother and the father, to be able to choose.
Stop it, yeah.
The greatest extent of life-saving treatment that's available to their child instead of having to be submitted to a government program that says, no, we're going to remove life support from your precious 11-month-old child because the government has decided that the prospects of their life are such that they no longer warrant an investment in health services. That's what single payer looks like. We hope and pray that little Charlie Gard gets every chance. But the American people ought to reflect on the fact that for all the talk on the left about single payer, that's where it takes us. And what President Trump believes in, what you've advocated now for years is let's have a healthcare system that's built on individual choice and free markets and state-based innovation reform. But none of that happens unless we stop and turn around and head healthcare back in the direction of freedom. That begins with the day that the United States Senate passes the bill before it today to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Let me ask you a tactical question.
Yeah.
Would you favor, if this seems to be the only way to get where you just said we want to go, a clean repeal with nothing to replace it and then use the recess to start on from scratch replacing it? Would you support that?
Well, let me say the president's made it very clear. While some in the Senate majority have said that if they can't pass the current bill, that they'll have to reach out to the Democrats. And you've got some Republicans, I saw them on television yesterday, saying we ought to reach out to a bipartisan bill. The president's made it very clear. We believe if they can't pass this carefully crafted repeal and replace bill, do those two things simultaneously, we ought to just repeal only, and then have enough time built into that legislation to craft replacement legislation in a way that's orderly and allows states to adjust to different changes in Medicaid over maybe a 3 or 4 year window and allows the insurance markets to evolve. But Rush, we simply cannot allow the disaster of Obamacare to continue. It is hurting families. I speak to everyday Americans all across this country every week, and I hear about people talk about, I had a woman come to an event that we were at in Wisconsin and say that she had to make a decision to drop off of her health insurance. It had become so expensive that she dropped off for the preemptive 3-month period of time so she could afford to buy Christmas presents for her children and her grandchildren. They can't afford the coverage. They can't afford, your point is extremely important. They not only can't afford the coverage because it's become much more expensive since Obamacare, but they can't afford to use it if they even are able to pay for it because the deductibles are so high.
Exactly.
You got people in Washington, D.C. that are standing around, hands on their hips, feeling good about the number of Americans who now are covered with health insurance. I don't hear that from so many people who are so-called covered because they have health insurance they essentially can't use. President Trump knows there's nothing more powerful than the free market. The free market in health insurance can work to lower the cost of health insurance, make services more available, create the kind of innovation that will give people incentives to make better healthcare choices, give states more freedom and flexibility. But it all starts with the Senate